So why do jazz purists hate Kenny G? If you'd like a short answer, it comes down to the disparity between his record sales and talent. Purists feel he has sold a ton of records despite not being up to the technical standards set by the great sax players. Where did all this hate come from? Why is Kenny G so hated in jazz-related circles? Are there objective reasons behind the hate? It's one thing to not like an artist, but why does it sometimes make us angry when someone else does? Kenny G is successful as far as record sales and is popular among other niches, just not among jazz musicians and some jazz enthusiasts. This hate seems to go well beyond "I don't like his music" or "I don't like how he plays," so there must be something more to it. The dislike for him isn't just because critics say his music is bland, unchallenging, and strays from traditional jazz styles, nor solely because he is incredibly popular and successful. It's because his popularity and success are rooted in the bland inauthenticity of his music. Did his whiteness and blandness literally also help him? Of course it did once he got to the point in his career where 1980s pop radio might or might not play his music. Radio and the music industry at large were segregated in ways that seem shocking even just a few decades later. Remember, at that time MTV did not play black artists. It has been said that it's mostly white elites that hate Kenny G, but then those same white elites claim they hate his music because it's made for white elites. Kenny's audience is so huge that it's ridiculous to claim any one thing about who they are, demographically. His audiences are like those at Disneyland. Basically everyone all over the world. Most people love or at least tolerate his music. But for many jazz musicians, scholars, and listeners, hating Kenny G is performed as an act of love for traditional jazz. Filmmaker Penny Lane said during an interview, "I think life is hard and there is nothing wrong with wanting something to relax to after your 10 hours at the factory. Kenny G's music doesn't get in the way, you can put it on in the background. People study to it, they meditate to it, they run to it, they make love to it, they get married to it. They've used it to put babies to sleep, and anesthesiologists use it before surgery. It helps get the heart rate down. The Chinese government uses it to send people home at the end of the workday." Kenny G even claims that when he made the mistake of playing it in the middle of a concert in China, the audience all got up and left. It is a supremely functional music. It's perfectly understandable if non-musicians or musicians not really interested in music theory stick to smooth jazz and stay away from bebop and its successors, and prefer simple melodies and minimal harmony instead. Kenny G is incredibly skilled technically, but his music soothes rather than challenges listeners, and he has contributed little, if anything, to advancing the jazz art form. Despite this, he has achieved immense wealth and popularity, and is often associated with jazz in the minds of many. Rightly or wrongly, his prominence makes him a symbol of the many white artists who have been idolized by mainstream audiences, while the artists of color who originally created these genres and styles are overlooked. As a result, he is seen as an undeserving appropriator of the creativity and artistic risks taken by others. Pat Metheny, when asked about his opinion of Kenny G, said, "I am aware of the success he has had, and the controversy that has surrounded him among musicians and serious listeners. This controversy seems to be largely fueled by the fact that he sells an enormous amount of records while not being anywhere near a really great player in relation to the standards that have been set on his instrument over the past 60 or 70 years. And honestly, there is no small amount of envy involved from musicians who see one of their fellow players doing so well financially, especially when so many of them who are far superior as improvisers and musicians in general have trouble just making a living. There must be hundreds, if not thousands, of sax players around the world who are simply better improvising musicians than Kenny G on his chosen instrument. It would really surprise me if even he disagreed with that statement." In 2000, Pat Metheny famously called out Kenny G for playing out of tune and not knowing advanced scales. But what he really took great exception to was Kenny's duet with one of the all-time jazz greats, Louis Armstrong, by overdubbing Armstrong's iconic recording of "What a Wonderful World." Kenny G said he thought it was a joke when he first read Metheny's critique, and he even tried to extend an olive branch to the jazz guitarist. "I had my manager talk to his manager and they go, 'No, he was serious.' I wrote him and said, 'Hey man, why are you so angry? Do you want to get together for lunch and talk about it?'" Kenny G goes on to say, "I like the way that I play. Unfortunately, our whole identity of ourselves is based on what other people think of us, and most people are narcissists anyway. We all think about ourselves. So if you're waiting for somebody else to give you your view of yourself and they're telling you what they think of you, you're doomed to be miserable. I know who I am. I know what I do. So, should he be compared to John Coltrane or Wayne Shorter, for instance, in terms of his abilities, or lack thereof, on the soprano saxophone and his success, or lack thereof, in using that instrument effectively to accurately assess his skills? Or is that unfair because their style of jazz is completely different? Isn't it like comparing baseball players to cricket players? Maybe a more apt comparison would be between a top 3 Major League Baseball player and a top 3 Little League player. Many people enjoy watching Little League games and are not interested in the major leagues, and that's totally their right. It is entirely possible, and even likely, that Kenny G can play at a high level, but he just gives his audience what they want. This analogy may not be very effective, but the truth is John Coltrane and Kenny G are extremely good at what they do, and their styles are dramatically different, and that's okay. If Kenny G can play at Coltrane's level, I'd argue that he's even better at marketing than playing music. It would mean that he could easily prove everyone wrong, but he'd rather have boatloads of cash than bragging rights. Jazz might sound like an old style, but it was always a bold and audacious genre. You don't have a 10-year span without someone experimenting with something completely new and crazy. Jazz is also consumed by many people that know a lot about music, and these people get bored pretty quickly if they're not stimulated by bold moves and perfect execution. Many jazz musicians have gone so far as to say that what he plays is not jazz at all. So the problem may not be Kenny G himself, but the way record companies automatically put instrumentalists, especially horn players, in the jazz category, and since the listening public has determined that what he plays is jazz, why should he be judged by any other standard? Why should he be exempt from what all other jazz musicians are judged by? That is their abilities in an improvisational context. Branford Marsalis said during an interview, "When all these jazz guys get in a tizzy over Kenny G, they need to leave Kenny alone. He's not stealing jazz. The audience he has wouldn't be caught dead at a real jazz concert or club. It's not like people are saying, I used to listen to Miles, Coltrane, and Ornette, and then I heard Kenny G and I never put on another Miles record. It's a completely different audience. It isn't a coincidence that when Kenny G refuses to answer the question, what type of music do you play? It's a no-win situation for him. If he says jazz, purists will laugh. If he says pop, lovers of pop will wince. If he admits that R&B stations played his music most at the beginning, everyone will start screaming. That's the trouble with choosing a lane that doesn't really exist. People will spend their energy trying to tell you what box you don't fit in, instead of realizing the simple fact that it doesn't matter. You can like something simply because it speaks to you. Genre is an illusion. This is James from One Track Jazz. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe.